Welcome. I am really excited to be here this evening. I am going to be moderating with my board chair, Rielle, a fabulous conversation with Rick Doblin. We're so grateful that you took the opportunity this evening to join us. Today, we're going to go over a bit of Rick's thoughts, insights on the FDA decision on MDMA, and then what's next for 2025. And I guess, as they say in many places, timing's everything. So there's some information that we're hoping to have Rick share with you today. As the conversation unfolds, we're going to make sure that there's some time for each of you to engage and interact and ask Rick a question as well. So my name is Reverdi Darda. As you see, everybody calls me Rev, and I am a board member on MAPS Canada. I've been on the board for about 18 months. It has been an exciting journey for me. My background is in healthcare. I currently am a registered nurse, and I coming to you from the province of Alberta. And in Alberta, I am also the CEO and co-founder of a mental health service company. We offer psychedelic assisted therapy both in Alberta, and we have a national network that's spreading across the country to be able to support access for those that are seeking alternative treatments. So I'm excited to be here, hear more about from Rick about his thoughts. And I'd like to turn it over to our board chair, Rielle Capler. She has been with the board about 2 years, just about 2 years. She has a master's in health admin, her PhD in drug policy, where she focused on medical cannabis across Canada. She has supported researchers in the field of cannabis and psychedelics and is amazing at supporting not only our mission, but our vision here at MAPS Canada. So she's going to moderate today's session with us. And then once, as I said, we're through some questions with Rick, we're going to turn it over to you. So you have an opportunity to ask some questions of him as well. Thanks so much, Rielle. I'm going to turn it on over to you.
Thank you. So I'm in Vancouver in the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish Nations. And a little bit about MAPS Canada. It was established in 2011. It's a nonprofit charitable organization. Our mission is to expand safe, legal, and equitable access to psychedelics through research, education, and advocacy. I want to state that we're a separate entity from MAPS US. We're a sister organization. We're independently governed and run. And I want to encourage you all to follow us on social media. And I'll put our mailing list address just in the chat as well. Follow us there. And I'm just going to introduce Rick Doblin now, the man of the hour. So Rick Doblin is a visionary leader. He's a pioneer in the field of psychedelic research. You all know who he is, but I'm still going to say all these things. And he's also a board member with MAPS Canada. He's the founder of MAPS USA, and as a founder and executive director of their organization of MAPS US, he's spent over 3 decades championing the therapeutic potential for psychedelics for mental health. Under his leadership, MAPS has been at the forefront of groundbreaking studies, particularly in the use of MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. Recently, Rick has been navigating the evolving landscape following the FDA's decision not to approve MDMA-assisted therapy as presented in their application as part of therapy. Despite the setback, Rick has remained deeply engaged in advancing the mission of MAPS. His recent work includes strategizing for the next steps in research and regulation, collaborating with the global psychedelic research community, and ensuring MAPS' continued leadership in the field. There's a lot going on right now. So this is a really, really great time to be talking. We didn't know what was going to be happening exactly right now. So we picked an auspicious date. We have, the FDA's decision, some recent interesting activities happening over at Lykos. There's new political leadership in the USA as of next week. There's some upcoming elections happening in Canada this year as well. So we're going to jump into all those things, but I just want to start with something a bit personal. Rick, you've been such a dedicated advocate for so long. You're always optimistic. You're always grounded. And I just want to ask you a little bit about you. Where does your vision come from, and what keeps you so inspired and optimistic and grounded?
Oh, I think we have to unmute Rick.
Okay, there we go. You just did. Thank you
Perfect.
both for what you're doing for MAPS Canada, and such an easy or good question to start with. I think the way for me to explain a bit is the universe decided to celebrate MAPS's 38th anniversary because it was April 8th and it was the full solar eclipse through the United States. And so we had a big gathering outside of Austin. I mean, it was part of a much bigger gathering, but we had a small kind of MAPS lecture series and a bunch of MAPS people gathering. And so at the full total eclipse, you see the sun is obscured. It's all darkness, just with this rim of light around it, this sort of beautiful little aurora from the sun, but it's covered by this darkness. So I kind of have seen that as a metaphor for me and my motivation. That what I am is this. I've been motivated by fear. I think that's been the thing that's kept me focused. But it was fear made into an ally instead of into sort of an oppressor in a stuff. So the fear was about what humans do to humans, and just born in '53, raised on stories of the Holocaust, had the whole Cuban Missile Crisis as a young boy and the whole world going up, Vietnam. And it just was this fear of the world that I'm coming into. A lot of young people feel that as well. But the fear was wrapped in privilege. And what I mean is that I was one step away from the Holocaust. But I had pretty much every possible privilege that you could have, in that I was born at a time of American exceptionalism. So I kind of adopted this idea, we can do great things. I was sort of coming of age when we were going to the moon. I was white. That was really helpful in America. I'm Jewish, the chosen people. So, God chose me. Of course, he chose everybody else. And of course, it's not a he. But anyway, I kind of, butt into this. And my family was well off. And somebody just reminded me recently, the only privilege that I didn't have was that I'm not tall. But other than that, and I had the freedom to try to do what I wanted to do, given to me by my grandparents and my parents. They said, "We're going to make sure you don't starve." One of the sweetest things that just happened recently. I was in Warsaw at a psychedelic conference in Warsaw, and I opened it up by saying, 104 years ago, my grandfather fled for his life from anti-Semitism from a small town near Bialystok and left with nothing to America. And what would he think 104 years later, his grandson coming back to Poland to bring MDMA? So, I'm one step away. The relatives left behind were mostly killed. But it was this sense of what happens, what people can do to each other. And in particular, my sort of diagnosis, I guess, as I was growing up, was that it's all the ways that we separate ourselves from each other and really feel us and them. And there are a lot of differences and all, but when I first started learning about psychedelics, it was about going beyond separation and feeling this interconnection. And I felt that had political implications. And then in 1972, when I really woke up to the value of LSD and learned about Stan Grof and his research and his cartography of the unconscious, and then that was after the backlash. The backlash came from 1970, the Controlled Substances Act, psychedelic research wiped out. It had already been sort of limited from the middle 60s on. And I thought, okay, what can I do to make this a crazy world even a little bit healthier, a little bit better? And I thought that this work with psychedelics was something that helped me feel deeper connected, that it could help do therapy for people that are struggling, and that the fact that Timothy Leary was, according to Nixon, the most dangerous man in America, it made me think, what is Timothy Leary doing right? that he has such a pissed off Nixon. So all of that became this idea that, okay, I've got this privilege. If I do nothing, this world could, each of us has an opportunity to contribute. I thought if I want to contribute to a better world. And so I will use the privilege that I have to work on something that I thought had no short-term likelihood of success, but was a long-term possibility. The idea of the healing and spiritual potential of psychedelics and bringing them up from the underground. So that's what really motivated me when I was 18, 1972, to devote my life to psychedelics. And luckily, my guidance counselor at college had Realms of the Human Unconscious directly from Stan Groff. And I was able to write to Stan and visit with Stan, take a workshop with Stan in 1972, and basically said, this is it. This is what I want to do. This is really important to try to bring back. And I'll just add that, my parents are no longer alive, but my father's favorite, it's hard to say this, a Holocaust writer, um, and one of the things that that he said, that there was this Shlomo Levi. He talked about how the idea is that you think that revolutions for freedom are done by the oppressed, that they throw off their chains, and then they struggle for freedom. He said, but that isn't the way it is. The purpose of oppression is to make it difficult for people to do that. And that the revolutions actually begin from those people that have some degree of privilege, because they are freer to operate and they can maybe withstand certain things. And so what it means is that if you have privilege, you have an obligation to work on behalf of others who are so oppressed that they cannot do that. So I felt that I had this privilege, I had this mission, which gave me purpose, and that's been now, 53 years ago. And so that's kept me on this straight and narrow. So it's this fear that was not overwhelming, but was highly motivating, wrapped in this privilege that meant that I could do this with joy, with comfort, a certain amount. And so I think that's really the longer answer to your question.
Wow. Thanks, Rick. I feel as though, digging into that inner essence is something that is inspiring and has come across in your words. And so thank you. I'm going to jump in.
Oh, sorry, one thing. It was Primo Levi is the Holocaust writer, not Shlomo. Sorry, I got that wrong, but Primo Levi. And he was the one that said this thing about oppression. Wow.
Well, thank you. So I'm going to jump right in to some of the meat and potatoes of the conversation today. Okay. So this is all about the FDA. So Rick, the FDA's decision on MDMA assisted therapy for PTSD was a huge disappointment. I'm sure that today the group is interested if you could share kind of your reaction when you heard about that. And I have a bit of a two-part question. So the first is, do you think this is a roadblock or potentially an opportunity to recalibrate? And then given the concerns, I'd love you to dive into more of your thoughts on what steps are being taken to address the FDA's feedback and any issues that were raised.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, it's definitely a roadblock. Obviously, it's a bump in the road for sure. It's not like a brick wall that we can't get past. So that's the difference. It's definitely a roadblock. And one of the things that I think is one of the lessons from it about what we can do differently has to do with the recent drama over potential new investors at Lykos that want to move it more towards public benefit. I think what we've done wrong over the last 2.5+ years is something that I fought against, but I didn't have the support of I didn't have enough power ability to change it. But what had happened was that Lykos became more and more and more like a traditional pharma company, and the public benefit became an afterthought. And we basically had a group of people who weren't from the psychedelic community, were not comfortable necessarily defending, and so they were nervous about psychedelic psychotherapy. They were defensive and reactive instead of proactive and trying to be not defensive, but not offensive, but proactively explain to people what we were doing. So to give you one example of the way things went wrong, and this was once I lost control as we had to take on investors, because we had helped catalyze the psychedelic renaissance. There was all these for-profit psychedelic companies. It became more difficult for us to raise donations. People are at that time. Now, a lot of this money has been lost. It's been invested in psychedelic companies, Field Trip being one of them, from Canada. But that it became difficult because a lot of people said, well, why should I donate? Let me just invest. And so we reached this point where we had to take on investors. The biggest loss of public benefit would be if we ran out of money and didn't even make MDMA into medicine. So we did take on investors, but we didn't manage it properly. And it just became more and more traditional. So to give you one example, this was 2 years and 6 months ago. A group of researchers said that they were interested in studying the role of touch in MDMA-assisted therapy. And it's delicate. So I think no touch is the wrong answer. Any touch is okay is the wrong answer. Where is this middle ground? And the MAPS logo actually is 2 hands, and what it symbolizes is people helping people. But it comes from a quote from Leo Zeff, who was the secret chief, the leader of the underground psychedelic therapy movement, who helped really develop MDMA. And he talked about how sometimes when somebody is going through a psychedelic experience, it's just amazing what you can do just to hold their hand, to give them that sense of, that they're not alone, take heart, it's scary, but go forward. So these researchers wanted to study touch, and the pharma executives at Lykos refused to provide the videos. Now, this was, they were nervous what they might show, or, but that was totally the wrong answer. We should be about what's the bottom line should be what's best for patients. How do we properly train the therapists? That should be, even for a traditional pharma company, that's what it should be, ideally. But often traditional pharma don't do that. So there was, the videotapes of Richard Jensen, Donna Dreyer, and Megan had been released, and there was just this uncertainty that the people at Lykos had, and they're just like, no, we don't want these videos to be reviewed by touch. The therapist said, we want to know. Now, if that had been done, if they would have said yes, then when it comes time to the FDA advisory committee meeting, they could have said, we care about safety. We've conducted the study of touch. This is what we found. Here's our guidelines. But that didn't happen. So that's just one of many, many examples of the way the other thing that's difficult is properly, how do you train therapists? And one of the things that is obvious to a lot of the therapists is that in addition to learning about different things, your own experience with whatever medicine you want to give to people is really important. And we actually have 2 protocols from the FDA for therapist self-experience. But Lykos said, oh, this is too controversial. This is like drug legalization. You're giving MDMA to people without a diagnosis. That's going to be scary. And then on top of that, they were like, there's no proof that therapists are better if they've done MDMA or LSD or psilocybin or whatever. And of course, the only proof would be that there would be large controlled studies of therapists who've never done MDMA versus therapists who had done MDMA. And our point was, really that it's not that all therapists who've done MDMA are better than all therapists who've not done MDMA. It's just that each therapist would be more effective if they knew the medicine they were giving to people. And then you have psychiatrists say, well, I give electroconvulsive therapy to my patients, or I give them antipsychotic drugs. I don't need to take them myself. And that's absolutely right. But those are the treatments. In psychedelic assisted therapy, the therapist is part of the treatment. They are the treatment. More than the drug is the therapist and the therapist's context and the safe support. So this sort of unwillingness to be the groundbreaking pioneer to try to address this issue with FDA. How do we create legal contexts that are inexpensive relatively for therapists to have self-experience? So then we had, and this was, I think, the most egregious of all, was the pharma company Lykos decided that traditional pharma companies have what they call a quiet period when you're trying to get your drug approved. So that may be fine for a drug that nobody has ever heard of, that only several thousand people have tried. But when it's a drug like MDMA, that over 20 million Americans have already tried it, that there's a lot of controversy about it. It's an illegal drug, and yet a lot of people use it. That this idea of we're not doing something traditional, we're doing something new. And so the quiet period became a rationale to not do anything. And so let me start by May 2023. There was an article in JAMA Psychiatry criticizing our therapy. And it was by some of the symposia people and Megan. And so I think it's fine for people to criticize. That's the whole scientific process, is somebody says something, somebody else says, hey, you're wrong, here's your assumptions. You go back and forth. And the whole purpose of science is also replications. You want to make, so it's fine to criticize. What is not fine is to ignore the criticism and to not respond as if it doesn't matter. So May 2023, criticism of the therapeutic approach, no response by Lykos. I wanted to respond. I was told no, that it's just going to bring more attention to the criticism. And I'm like, well, that's the point, though, because you want to bring more attention to the criticism because our arguments will address the critiques and they will leave people. Then, just as a follow-up, in October of this year, 2024, JAMA Psychiatry had another article criticizing the therapy that we used in phase 3. Lykos did not even bother to reply. It was Michael Alpert, who was a psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School, who worked on the Boston phase 3 site, and it was Michael Mithofer and me, who and Michael, our lead psychiatrist, who developed. We replied as comments in JAMA Psychiatry, but Lykos did not do. So it's just this quiet period then became a justification for not only Lykos to do nothing, but for them to control MAPS. And the idea was, I'm on the Lykos board. They claim I speak for Lykos, and that therefore they could critique. And I said, wait, there's all sorts of things about activist investors where, you buy a share of a company, you criticize the company. You can do that by being on the board. It's not, but in any case, Lykos created a vacuum. And then when there was criticisms, there was no real response. And this really started getting into a problem with this group, the ICER, which is the Institute for Clinical Effectiveness Research. And they normally go ahead and look at cost effectiveness. They want to see what the price of the drug is going to be. They're funded by the insurance companies, and they want to see the price of the drug. Lykos decided not to cooperate with them. And that was a super negative. Not only did they talk about the price, which actually they came to, their thing was somewhere in the neighborhood of $3,500 a dose is fine from a cost effectiveness perspective, that insurance companies should pay, so for 3 MDMA sessions, you'd pay $10,000 for the MDMA or something like that. They're saying that's totally fine. But then they criticized the protocol design, the fact that we didn't have a double blind that worked. The therapy they claimed was anything goes, and that's what these criticisms are that hadn't been answered. And so it was very, very negative. And then after that this was like a month or two before the FDA advisory committee. meeting. And then there was a series of media articles. This is where we lost control of the narrative. It turned negative and negative. And again, there was no response. And so there was now something in the Washington Post that criticized the double blind. The double blind did not work, but we knew that and we negotiated. So I wanted to reply. And someone from Lykos said, we do not need to persuade the Washington Post. We just need to persuade the FDA. And they said, I've talked to various people on the MAPS board. You're blocked from even writing or communicating. So it became the tail wagging the dog. The pharma company, the for-profit company, became controlling over the communications of the nonprofit, completely upside down, and supported by enough people on the MAPS board and certainly on the Lykos board, this failed strategy. So that really led to this FDA advisory committee meeting. And at the committee meeting, there was not sufficient explanation of how the double blind was developed. I'll just do this in 1 minute because it's too complicated and there's other better stuff to talk about. But my dissertation was a big part of my dissertation was how do you do a double blind study? And so I studied. And my conclusion was that the best way to do double blind with drugs like MDMA that you take it is to do therapy with low dose MDMA versus therapy with full dose. Everybody gets MDMA. That's better than inactive placebo, and it's better than an active placebo that's not MDMA. Everybody now will be told, you're all getting MDMA. They don't know the difference necessarily between low dose and full dose. But then the challenge is to find the dose that is high enough to cause some confusion, like microdosing won't do it because you just don't, that's the whole principle of microdosing, you don't know. High enough to cause some confusion, but not so high so it's so therapeutic that you can't tell the difference between the two groups. So then we embarked, I got my dissertation in 2001. From 2000 to 2016, we did a series of phase 2 studies trying to deal with the double blind. And we looked at therapy with inactive placebo, therapy with 25 milligrams, 30 milligrams, 40 milligrams, 50 milligrams, 75, 100, 125, and 150. And so we're looking for this sweet spot of where's this dose to use for the control condition and what is our therapeutic doses. And so what we ended up discovering through all of this was that you could get more confusion by using lower doses of MDMA. But what we found to our surprise was that the lower doses in the range of 25, 30, 40, 50, those doses tended to make people uncomfortable. It's like turbulence in an airplane. You're just taking off. It's kind of shaky. Then you get above the clouds. And so they still got better, but the people that got therapy with no MDMA did better than the people that got therapy with low dose MDMA. And then we did a study with veterans, firefighters, and police officers with PTSD. One group got 30 milligrams, one got 75 milligrams, one got 125 milligrams. The group that got 75 milligrams did the best, more than the 125. Now, when you randomize things, the group that had 125 had way more depression associated with the PTSD. It wasn't enormously better at the 75 milligrams, but that showed us that the 75 milligram dose group was really effective. Can be. So there was no sweet spot where we could find where a drug that didn't either activate but made people uncomfortable or got high enough and tipped it over, and now it's really therapeutic. So we went to the FDA when we were doing this special protocol assessment process in 2017, and we said, we'll give you blinding if you want, but you're going to make our job easier to find a difference between the two groups as compared to doing therapy without MDMA. We think the results will be better with therapy without MDMA. And so you can make our job easier or you can make our job harder. The other part of it is that when you use therapy with inactive placebo, you have a better safety database because you know that whatever you see is due to therapy with people with severe or moderate to severe PTSD. It's not due to the fact that you gave them a little bit of MDMA. So we presented that to FDA and we said, we'll do whatever you want. And they brought in Bob Temple, who is the old wise man of FDA, Office of Science Policy, there since 72. So when I learned about psychedelics, he started working at the FDA. they brought him into that meeting, and the meeting was, we would prefer for you to do therapy with inactive placebo to make it harder for you with therapy with full dose MDMA. So that's kind of a long story. That's what I would have said to the Washington Post and explained it. But I was blocked from doing that. So then you get the ICEA report is saying, oh, functional unblinding, it's a terrible thing. And that's what, in large part, because Lykos didn't communicate. Then the advisory committee says that, and then made a super big deal of that. The other thing to say is that those people that we negotiated with at FDA in 2017 on how to design the protocols, they left the FDA, and new people took over, and they were more conservative at the Division of Psychiatry than the old people. Much more risk averse, younger in their careers, not as confident, worried that they might make a mistake, and so they became overly harsh in different ways. We have won 2 legal formal disputes with FDA, Division of Psychiatry. The most recent one was about our marijuana project, where they refused to let us study smoked or vaporized marijuana. The other one was about a protocol to give MDMA to therapists, where they said no. And then they said, oh, you need MD PhDs as a lead therapist, and you need a doctor on site, and all of this, which we then marshaled all the scientific arguments and didn't have to do that. So what I guess I'm trying to say in this big picture is that when you do something new and innovative, it's incumbent upon you to constantly be trying to educate people about what you're doing. And you need a proactive communication strategy. And to hide in your shell when you feel defensive, which is what these traditional pharma people felt, is not the way to do that. And then you just let the criticism grow and grow and grow. So I think that the FDA Advisory Committee meeting is also important to contrast with the Dutch State Committee on MDMA. So Lykos then did not communicate to people about the Dutch State Committee. But what happened was in early 2023, Lykos, which I had set up as doing research in America, our phase 3 studies are international, Israel, Canada, and the United States. That's also what helped prompt MAPS Canada. But I also felt that we needed to do work in Europe. You needed to work with the EMA. You need to create this consensus that regulatory agencies around the world are all reviewing this, we're all looking at it, and it gives other regulators comfort. Oh, these guys over there, they said it's safe enough to do research, and oh, it's moving towards medicine. So we had studies in the Netherlands, in two sites in the Netherlands, in Germany, in England, Norway. So we're doing a bunch of stuff in Europe and phase 2 studies just to prepare the therapists for doing phase 3. So Europe was already a couple of years behind the US, but we were doing these open label studies to train therapists, to give them feedback as they work with their first PTSD patients. And Lykos shut it down. They're saying, oh, we're going to put all the money into commercializing in the US, and we don't want to, we're financially challenged, and we want to shut down everything that's going on in Europe. So the chief psychiatrist of the Dutch Ministry of Defense, Eric Vermetten, was helping to lead the studies in the Netherlands. And they had seen tremendous benefits from people that had failed to obtain relief before from the currently available therapies and medications. So the Dutch government said, let's have a commission and figure out what to do. Now there's no pharma company trying to make MDMA into a medicine in Europe. So the Dutch State Committee was set up, and they had about a year to review. They had real subject matter experts as compared to the FDA Advisory Committee, who had people that didn't really even know what they were talking about in many, many different ways, weren't experts in psychotherapy and psychedelics or anything. And then the Dutch State Committee had to write a report about what their findings were to justify it. The FDA Advisory Committee just needed to say, oh, I vote no, or I vote yes. All right, so June 4th, FDA Advisory Committee votes no. Groupthink, all sorts of suspicions created about is the data reliable, all of that. And they said no. June 6th, 2 days later, the Dutch State Committee that had access to the same information, and in their report, they said efficacy is proven, safety is proven, and we need to immediately make this available for an unmet medical need, and we should do it in what they called naturalist studies, sort of like the special access program in Canada, or expanded access in the United States, or similar to what's going on in Australia. That you get this available in a compassionate way, And October 10th, I think it was, the Dutch Parliament Mental Health Committee reviewed that, accepted that report. All right, but we have June 4th negative from FDA, June 6th positive from FDA Advisory Committee, and nobody ever heard about the Dutch State Committee. So the Dutch State Committee is being the scientific critique. The other part I'll add is that some of the supporters, Lykos, in the 2 months between the FDA Advisory Committee and the FDA decision, they pursued an overly political strategy, meaning they got 19 senators, they got 61 members of the House to write letters saying this should be approved, we need it for the veterans, all of this. That's not bad, but the FDA doesn't want to be pushed around by politicians. They want to be science. And so by not talking about the Dutch State Committee, by not explaining about the double blind and how the protocol was arrived, by not defending the therapy, but just going on this political approach, they really boxed FDA into a corner where they couldn't really reverse the advisory committee without pointing to some scientific reasons why. And then we ended up in this disastrous situation with the FDA rejection. So that's a bit of my diagnosis of kind of what happened. And maybe now you'd want to switch to
Yeah, I mean, it's a good diagnosis, and it kind of shows us how just all the different kind of avenues and players, like how it makes a difference, how it's really important. And, so that kind of brings us to Lykos. So, following that decision, Lykos announced substantial layoffs. Things changed a lot over there. It seemed that one of your frustrations was how Lykos strayed from the public benefit mission of MAPS. And now something exciting has happened. So again, like why this is so timely, there's all this buzz about Antonio Gracias, $100 million proposal to take over Lykos. And it seems that you're publicly supporting that. So, I mean, how will that change? Like, what was the kind of, trajectory before, and now what are the possibilities?
Okay, so I'm more than publicly supporting it. I'm helping to try to bring it together. So here I'll tell a story that's really interesting. So Antonio Gracias donated $1 million to MAPS back in 2020 for the phase 3. He has since donated $16 million to Harvard for a psychedelic, pan-Harvard psychedelic work at the Divinity School, the law school, the medical school, School of Government, so that now there's kind of a whole infrastructure to do different aspects of psychedelics. He's donated, I don't know exactly, but I think it's about $1 million to Rachel Yehuda at the Bronx VA. He's donated money to Hopkins for a really interesting study that's going to be combining MDMA with psilocybin at the same time. So that's never been studied. We've studied MDMA, people have studied psilocybin, but nobody's ever studied people taking MDMA and psilocybin at the same time, which is used a lot in underground therapy settings. So Antonio has demonstrated his philanthropic interest. All right. Now, a couple of years ago, after he donated this $1 million, we were informed by an expert from Boston Consulting Group that just getting the drug approved doesn't mean it gets to patients. You need to do commercialization. And he said, we were told we need to spend $60 to $70 million on commercialization, and any pharma company would have started it a year before. And my whole PhD and everything, my expertise was drug development. I have never studied commercialization. So we ended up bringing in a royalty share in $43 million to start building up this commercialization team. We had 50 or 60 people on the team at Lykos. So Antonio and several people came to us and said, you know what, we will donate $25 million, but we want you to turn MDMA into a generic. And we don't think you need to spend all this money on commercialization. So you should basically stop all that, which would mean firing 50 or 60 people, or not all of them, but many of them, and revising completely how to do it. At this point, the Lykos board didn't want that, the MAPS board didn't want that, and I had believed that you need this infrastructure to get it to patients. I've since seen how Lykos spends money, and lots of it didn't need to be spent. But the point is that we did not accept Antonio's proposal at that time. All right, so now years go by, and now it's Burning Man. After a couple weeks after FDA rejection. And there was this really amazing exhibit called We Shall Dance Again. And it's this big tent area out in the playa. The poles holding it up are the double helix like life. And this is from the Nova Rave in Israel.
Mhm.
It's the survivors of the Nova Rave and others. So this idea of We Shall Dance Again. And so on Saturday morning, they had a sunrise ceremony at 6 a.m. to memorialize the 359 or so people that were murdered at that rave and more abducted. And so I was there for that. It was kind of very somber and very beautiful. And then at 6:29, when the Hamas attack happened, that's when they started the dance party. So this is We Shall Dance Again. And they had a DJ, and they had the DJ set. This was a DJ who had survived. And they started the dance party at the exact minute that the attack happened and the music stopped. And there's thousands of people doing this dancing at sunrise and everything. And who should be dancing right next to me is Antonio Gracias.
Wow.
Right next to me. So he turns to me and he says, I just want you to know it's not your fault that the FDA rejected things. He said, I just want you to know, I did due diligence years ago when we made this offer. Your protocols were designed really well. If you would have stayed nonprofit, you would have gotten approval. I talked to various people, FDA and stuff, but it's the Lykos people that ruined it. And he said, we should just let them go bankrupt and then delete, and then we'll start over. And I was like, well, they're not going to go bankrupt. They're going to find a way to raise money at low valuation. They'll keep doing this. They're not going to go bankrupt. But I really appreciate you saying it's not my fault. I'm not racked with guilt. I don't think it's my fault. I've been fighting them for 2.5 years for all these different reasons. And it was just a beautiful sort of moment. Okay, what I've realized for the last couple of years that as this company becomes more and more traditional, that the only way to turn it around in a different way would be through new investors who care more about public benefit, that we needed to find new investors to put in new money and change the whole approach. And so I was completely unable to find any. And out of sort of a last minute thought, Ron Beller, who I work with, is a coach and tremendous, used to be Goldman Sachs partners, coach, anyway, helping a bunch of us. He suggested, go ahead and reach out to Antonio. And I'd gotten this term sheet from the current lead investor, and it was a super low valuation, and it was really ending all of MAPS's influence. It wasn't quite bankrupt, but it was close to it. So I contacted Antonio and I said, would you be a white knight? Would you be willing to come here and invest and turn this around? And it took us like a month or so of discussions. He wanted more information. I would get it. He would think about it. I'd get all right. And then we were getting great pressure from the current lead investor to take the deal because now money's running out. Lykos is running out of money. And we had this MAPS board meeting that was to decide what to do. Which should we just end MAPS's control and just sign everything over to this new group that's then going to do an IPO and get money from the public and turn, and you can just see like public benefit shredding more and more and more in this plan. So it was several hours before, the morning before this MAPS board meeting, Antonio finally came to the point. He said, I will make a better offer than you've got there.
Wow.
Just in the nick of time, just incredibly, just in the nick of time. So we did not take that. And then what's happened since then has been so rejuvenating, so wonderful, is that there's $100 million that is going to be invested by someone who does not want to make money. It's not about money. He said he's known as, very aggressive moneymaker in his work, venture capital, but this is not about money. This is about public benefit. And so the challenge now is to sort of take all of the people that invested. Many of them really cared a lot more about public benefit than about money, but they didn't donate the money, they invested it. Now, they've lost most of their money. The valuation has gone way down because of FDA rejection. And we also don't know yet if we need another phase 3 study or not. So the how do we sort of come to this deal? It's not fully resolved yet, but the negotiations are ongoing. I'm quite hopeful that there'll be some way to respond to the investors, but they've lost a bunch of their money, and we've got management or new investors that really don't want anybody to think that they're in this to make money, which means also they're not going to try to make loads of money to give it back to these investors either. They want to reinvest the money in patient assistance. There's a lot of people that don't have insurance. A lot of people that are, even those people that have insurance, often therapy is underinsured, and a lot of therapists don't even take insurance, and they want to put it into training therapists. So this is the dream that I had in the beginning, was a nonprofit that owns a public benefit pharma company that really is public benefit, that really is about doing innovative things. And so we've probably got another couple of weeks of negotiations to go. It's extremely hopeful. And I'll just say, how do we decide what's going to happen as far as do we need another phase 3 study or not? What I'm sharing is all in the public domain. A lot of it has been in Psychedelic Alpha and other things, but has to be a review of all these videotapes. Now, for the FDA wants these videotapes reviewed to see all these accusations were made. People are saying, oh, these therapists are telling people don't report your adverse events, or, we're trying to change history, so make sure that you report positively that you're healed. Now, I don't think that really happened. I don't think that therapists are trying to hide adverse events or trying to get people to report something that they didn't feel. That's certainly not an overall policy. Maybe there was some statement somebody heard. We've had some people said, oh, I felt that I should report this in certain ways, but they weren't told to. So anyway, all these videos need to be reviewed. And that's going to take millions and millions of dollars. It's going to take many, many months. There's negotiations going on with FDA right now about what it is how you review who the people review the videos and what do they see. So the irony, of course, is that more than 2.5 years ago, if they would have agreed to have the videos reviewed for touch by researchers who are going to do it for free, now they disarmed themselves with the advisory committee. Now it's ending up having to happen anyway. And so the issue is going to be, what is the report of these reviews of the videotapes? And then the FDA will decide, can they trust this data? Is this something that can be approved? Maybe you want what's called a phase 4 study, where you gather additional information post-approval. So I think, basically, approval is delayed maybe 6 months or 3 years if there needs to be another phase 3 study. So that's the situation that we face. And that's why Antonio coming with $100 million is that we are now well capitalized, whatever is needed. Either it's going to be, okay, it's phase 3 accepted, and now let's start putting money into other studies. One of the biggest other studies is group therapy. And I think that's really important. So there needs to be a lot of research into group therapy, which is underway at the Portland, Oregon VA. In Australia, they're doing group therapy. In Israel, they're doing group therapy. In England, they're going to do group therapy. We need to do, I think, a study with people on SSRIs. One of the advantages of ketamine is you can give ketamine to people who are on SSRIs. More and more, it looks like psilocybin can be given to people on SSRIs. I believe MDMA can too. It blunts the effect of MDMA. I believe that that we need to do a dose response safety study of higher doses of MDMA to people on SSRIs. I think they'll have a full experience or pretty full, and I don't think you'll catalyze serotonin syndrome, but that has to be studied. So there's a lot of research to be done. And at this moment, what seems to be within reach is new investors who really want to fulfill the dream of a public benefit pharma company focused on what's best for patients.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing, Rick. I think in covering the science and the research and then the investment support, I'm looking at our time. I'm going to move us into 2 other quick questions before we open it up to the group that's joined us today. So we all know the political landscape has also its own impact on the work that we move forward. So the political landscape in the US, it's shifting. And of course, figures like Elon Musk who are showing interest in psychedelics, well, it's getting a little interesting, I would say. And so how do you think these changes, especially the incoming administration, might influence MDMA approval and psychedelic research?
Well, what I think is really, really important is that any decision that's made be based on the science. So there is this kind of political overlay, certainly, but I don't feel that political intervention is the way to go. You need to really base it on the science. So I think that a lot of the rejection was for the FDA is concerned about various different things, but it wasn't really about the data. That's what we're, for example, a bunch of the people at the FDA advisory committee was like, oh, this is terrible. At 40% of your people had prior experience with MDMA and 60% had never done MDMA. These 40% that have done MDMA, they must like MDMA. Therefore, they're going to have better outcomes and they're going to have fewer side effects. Okay, that's a valid question to raise. But if you look at the data, there's no difference in safety or efficacy, really, between the people that had done MDMA and the people that had never done MDMA. So what ended up at the FDA advisory committee was all this confusion, like, oh, this is bias, and there wasn't enough explanation about how this decision about how to design the study to use the inactive placebo. So I think that the new administration cares a lot about veterans. I think that either way, however the election went, we would have had we would eventually have gotten MDMA approved for PTSD. I think that there is a lot of support. So I think the danger of the current shift in politics, which is maybe more favorable, is that whatever decision has to be justified on the basis of the data. So one of the things that has been difficult for me to see at Lykos is that MAPS had a policy of transparency, of posting all of our communications back and forth to the FDA. That has ended. Lykos is not doing that. So I think we need to be much more forthcoming. And so what they were saying, the Lykos people, oh, we can't make all this public because that's going to just give reasons for all of these critics to criticize. I'm like, well, that's okay. You got to be able to defend your data. And in fact, when they criticize, you can answer. But instead they felt super defensive. So this transparency is lost. So I think that is something that we need to put more emphasis on, because because we really need to demonstrate that. So what we're trying to do is get the politics out of it in a way and have it looked at on the basis of the data. And I think there's a good chance that'll happen.
That's good.
Yeah, that is really what it should be based on. You want to have the data, but you also want to have an administration that's open to it, that has the political will to go forward. And, we're in a situation now in Canada where we don't know what's going to happen, but there's going to be an election this year. And, the FDA decision, we want to know how that's going to impact Canada. We were kind of looking at that before. We already saw that when the FDA made their decision, there were some impacts in our special access program where they started getting more, conservative or wary about making approval. So it definitely does have an implication. And then, with the new political climate in the US with Canada's. So we just want to kind of have your sense of, how all of this is going to impact Canada. But I also wanted to share one thing with you too, is there is a study that we're hoping to partner with or support in some way. It's a group therapy for first responders using psilocybin. So that's something we can talk more about, but that will be a really great group therapy study to support in Canada. But so back to the question is, how do you see all of this impacting Canada? What's happening with Lykos and FDA and the new administration?
So my sense is that Health Canada does not want to be first. They want to follow the FDA. The same is true with the Ministry of Health in Israel. They don't want to be first, but they're glad to be second. So I think that people look at the FDA as the world's most professional scientific organization to review data about new drugs, because America's got such a big pharma industry, a big country, a lot of wealth. We do have, I think even more so than the EMA, than the European Medicines Agency, is the FDA sort of the gold standard of the world. So I think that Canada is going to very much look at what FDA. On the other hand, Canada is leading the United States with legalizing marijuana. It's leading the United States right now with your special access program. And it's leading in drug policy reform if you look at what's going on in British Columbia and elsewhere. So one hopes that the Health Canada would look at what's going on with all of these special access experiences and maybe go, before the FDA, but I don't think they will. Also, what's happened is Lykos has pulled back from all communications except for the FDA, which I think is also kind of a mistake. You want to be working through all of these in simultaneously. So I think with Canada, the FDA has permitted all sorts of research throughout the Veterans Administration, also investigator-initiated trials. So I think the message from FDA is not, oh, we reject this, never. It's like, this is a bad drug. It's just not yet. We have questions. We need more data. So whether the let me say something else really good about Canada, which is that we're doing global humanitarian projects. Somaliland, we want to do stuff in Bosnia, a lot of places. And the MDMA is coming from Canada. So Health Canada recently permitted MDMA to be sent to Somaliland for a protocol to give to therapists as part of their training, so they don't have the psychedelic background. So really the Canadian suppliers of MDMA, because again, Lykos has a supply, but it's not supplying it unless it's a few of these investigator-initiated trials, and they're very conservative which ones they choose, and also, because of all these layoffs, they've kind of closed the program to new applicants. So I just hope that Canada will either follow FDA very quickly or will independently think about it. And in particular, I think this idea of the special access program. What we're trying to do in the United States is what's called right to try. Canada is also ahead in terms of death with dignity, this idea of, helping people to die if there are certain conditions, if they're in a lot of pain. So Canada is ahead of the US and much of the US in that as well. So we're hopeful. Canada is leading in a lot of different ways, but I think in terms of approval, I think they're going to wait on FDA.
Well, thank you. So I guess we are moving on to the next part of our webinar, where all of you that have joined us get an opportunity to ask, I guess, hopefully you've been thinking about it as Rick's been sharing some of his thoughts and perspectives, questions that you'd like to actually ask Rick. So what we'd like to do is, if you do have one, just raise your hand. At the bottom of the screen, you can see that there should be a react button for you, and you can just click on that. And in doing that, it allows you to raise your hand. Rielle and I will moderate kind of the questions. We hope that I would say I have the opportunity to meet with Rick. I want to ask a lot of things, but if we could keep it to one question and quite concise, we have about 30 minutes and we'll try and get through all of you who are interested. And yeah, we'll just get started then. So I saw John put up his hand. So first, if you feel comfortable turning on your camera or not, that's okay. But I'll go to John. Do you have a question for Rick?
Yeah. Hey, Rick, I'm going to leave my camera off just because I just got in from the gym and I look disgusting. But I have a question. So given the nature of the criticisms of MAPS, the people in Symposia and other groups who are opposed to, let's call it, any sort of right-wing edge to psychedelia, can you tell me about any misgivings you might have about accepting, $100 million cash injection from someone who is identified publicly as an Elon Musk super loyalist? Are there going to be any complications created by that, do you think?
I feel that one of the most important things that MAPS has done in our history has been trying to develop bipartisan support. And so I'll just share this brief story, which was one of the things that I've done that's gotten a lot of criticism was accepting $1 million donation from Rebecca Mercer. Rebecca and her father, they owned Cambridge Analytica, which was used to help the Russians, and others target how to, send information through social media to certain districts and stuff to try to help Trump get elected in that first. And Rebecca and her father are very right-wing conservatives. They're Steve Bannon supporters. All right, so she donated $1 million to MAPS. Her only restriction was to use it for veterans. So now so I did that years later, got a lot of criticisms for that. Now I'm sitting at a Passover Seder. My wife and I are sitting at a Passover Seder, and sitting next to us is this old couple. I don't recognize them. The guy says he's a judge, but everybody else was scientists. His wife has written a book about parents who have children with fatal illnesses and how to process grief. And we had this long talk about MDMA and MDMA therapy and marijuana, this whole talk. And finally, I realized this guy is, I started thinking, turned out he wasn't just a judge, he's a Supreme Court judge, Stephen Breyer. So I'm sitting next to a U.S. Supreme Court judge, and I say, I have an ethical question. And John, this gets to your point. I said, should I have taken this money from Rebecca Mercer? And he said, the essence of democracy is trying to find common ground with those people with whom you may disagree on everything else, but you try to find common ground. And he said, one of the things that's so bad with our politics is we've gotten so partisanship and we don't have this agreements, and everybody has gone into their respective tribes, and there's not a lot of this bipartisan support for anything. And that actually, even though you may make them look good because they're doing stuff, and some other stuff you might disagree with what they're doing, you must try to find this common ground. So I feel like that was a great answer for me from the U.S. Supreme Court case. So a lot of our support has been from people that are from across the political spectrum. So no, I don't feel bad at all by accepting support from someone who's more on the right-wing Republican side of things, because what they want to do with their money is good. What they want to do is help people. They want to really heal people, and it's not about money. And so that, for me, answers the questions. And I think that this idea of bipartisan support and it's what you do, and people, we're not black and white, So I think letting people who I may disagree with on a bunch of things work together on things that we do agree with, I think that's what we need to do.
Right. Thanks very much, Rick. So I see, and I apologize, I think we'll have time for everyone, but I'm next for your question.
Who did you ask for next?
Oh, Sam.
Oh, okay, I'll just unmute Sam.
Hi. I'm just wondering why you decided to go public with this whole fight with Lykos.
Oh,
From the
okay.
point of view of somebody on the outside, it sure sounds like you're throwing Lykos management under the bus and the
I
Lykos
am.
board.
You're right. You're right. I am.
And that includes many people, Amy Emerson, who are longtime parts of MAPS.
Yeah.
And wondering why you decide this very publicly rather than usually this goes on behind closed doors.
Okay.
Inside the
So,
board.
so the big
And
question.
from the outside point of view, it just looks like the psychedelic community is at war with itself. And I don't see how that's helpful.
Okay. Well, I don't know who leaked this thing about Antonio's offer for Lykos. That was not anybody from MAPS. That was not me. So we were not trying to make that public. I mean, we weren't trying to keep it out of the public, but it just was internal discussions. But I do think that talking about the disagreements we have with the Lykos management, it's important to try to understand, was FDA rejection because they are rejecting MDMA, or were there things that led up to that moved it in a more negative way? So yeah, I think that it's been heartbreaking for me these last 2.5 years to watch how Lykos is doing things. I think that Amy and I have worked very closely together for decades, and I think that some of the decisions that she made, neither she nor I were really experts in commercialization. And I would just say that she tended to take the recommendations and advice from these traditional pharma people. And I don't think that that was such a good idea in many different cases, especially quiet period and other things. So I think it's also, I tend to lean towards transparency. And I think that there is importance in discussing these things in public. But the latest, discussion from Antonio is like, who was the leaker, who put that out in public. But I do think it's important to try to analyze what went wrong and really try to get to the heart of it. And I make mistakes too, and I'm fully, open for people to criticize me as well. But I don't know that it would have been better. Like what I just said about the study of touch. Should I have not said that at all? That is something that the therapist and I had been fighting with Lykos for years about. And I think it was really a significant omission and decision that was counterproductive. And so I felt that it was important to talk about. Sam, I don't know if that really answers your question or.
You're on
Oh, I
mute.
think you're still muted, so you can unmute.
Sorry. Once the decision is made to go one way or another to proceed, do you have any thoughts about how to heal all those wounds? Because I think they're real.
I'm sure you are right. Those wounds are right. I think there needs to be new management. That's one of the ways to heal, is that what Lykos has to do is to return towards prioritizing what's best for patients and public benefit. So I think the wounds, I think one of the things that most worries me is the entire field of psychedelics has gotten the message, oh, FDA didn't like therapy. The therapy was complicating. So you've got the entire psychedelic field practically trying to minimize therapy. You have mind medicine saying we're giving LSD to people, but there's no therapy. That is not what's best for patients at all. But they're trying to do that because they think that's what the regulators want. And I don't think that's the real message from FDA. They just have a lot of concerns and confusions. So I think this healing will come from really returning to public benefit. And I think it will mean not working with a lot of traditional pharma people who are trying traditional pharma approaches to something that is not traditional. This is not primarily a drug. It's drug plus therapy. And when you think about it in a traditional way and you don't explain the therapy, you don't defend the therapy, it just goes wrong. So the healing, I think, is important, and it's to recognize that people were not ill-intentioned. People have different conclusions about what's the way to go, what's the right level of risk aversion. So I think that dealing with people. So again, it's like if people are endorsing traditional pharma approaches, well, they have not worked. Look where we're at right now. And so, but it's to see that it's not that the people are wrong, it's just those opinions were wrong. So I think that'll be part of the healing.
Yeah. Thank you, Rick. Okay, we'll go to Preston next.
Hi, Rick. Thanks very much for your time today, and thanks for your kind words about Canada. My question is actually kind of related to the SAP program, and actually more involved with looking at the Australian program, so the authorized prescriber program in Australia. To me, that seems to be the one that's probably the most advanced in terms of, how do I want to say, democratization of the therapy, really allowing a therapist to bring a patient in and deliver a therapy. So I guess there's, I know it's supposed to be one question, but it's very much related here. So one, I guess, is looking at the data from the patients that are treated in the authorized prescriber program in Australia, and how that might relate to just adding to the knowledge and looking perhaps at your potential of phase 3 study, or if that's a review, looking more at that side of things. And then thoughts on, kind of how we could bring a program like that to either the Canada or the US.
Wow. Well, the idea of the Dutch State Committee and recommending these naturalist studies, they were both compassionate use, but they also were data gathering. So one of the things that I am not clear about, but I think in the special access program in Canada, there's not much data gathering. In Australia, they are gathering some data, and the Dutch State Committee wants to do this sort of middle ground where you do real world evidence, but you gather more data than is being gathered by the special access program. So I think that that's something that's really, really important. The other part is that when you work in the special access program or these ways, you're working with people that are not as narrowly chosen with all these inclusion and exclusion criteria. So it's more like real world evidence of what it will be like when you work with broader populations. So I think it means that it's even more important to gather data, because you're working with people that may have different risk factors that didn't exist in the clinical trials because they were excluded for one reason or another. So Shane, I just say there is a data gathering study from the SAP in Canada at the University of Calgary. That's really good to hear. I think that we need more of that. And I think that also this idea that people are suffering now, and it will take a while, even, a long time to even if it's 6 months from now, for FDA says, so people are suffering now. So I think that the work that the special access program, the Australia, it's really important, but I'm concerned that there's not enough data gathering with it. Did that get enough of your questions, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know that with Australia, there's essentially, kind of a post-therapy questionnaire that gets filled out. And I don't, it could be kind of one, maybe a 2-pager kind of thing, right? So it's certainly not a ton, but it does look like from our perspective that in terms of number of doses or number of treatments that are going to be given, Australia is going to be taking the lead here in the next while through the authorized prescriber program. It just seems to be a lot more, seems to be a little bit better in place. And I know SAP in Canada has its challenges in terms of getting approvals and having to do kind of each thing on an individual basis versus, having basically a therapist approved, and then, patients can come to them and get treatment. So no, that's great. Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
Thanks,
And I just want to thank you for providing MDMA for some for Optimi, for providing MDMA for some very important projects and patients.
You are very welcome, and there's more to come for whoever needs it.
That's great.
Great. Thank you, Preston. I'll go to Gina.
Well, this is more of a just a comment. I actually appreciate, Rick, the transparency, because there's a lot of gossip in the clinical world around things like that. We hear, people will get the FDA decision and not understand the background behind it, and the FDA decisions becomes this black and white thing. So the FDA is saying no, so everybody now is vilifying psychedelic therapy
Yes.
in broad strokes. And being able to have that background information allows us to then speak to that just on a one-on-one level, because there are so many practitioners now that will tell clients, oh, don't do it at all, or it's bad for you. The FDA said no, without understanding all of that behind the scenes stuff. So I think you going, publicly sharing that helps those of us in the field trying to help people do this just get the approval and the support that they need. Because
Yeah.
people will go to their family doctors and the doctor will say, oh no, the FDA said no, it's bad for you, don't do it. And then that's it, it's off the table. So they won't even find a psychotherapist to ask more questions to, because most people, at least in Canada, go to their MDs. And the MD is going to with the FDA. They're not reading the trial science or asking those bigger questions. So I just wanted to say thank you for clarifying, because that helps us actually have some legs to stand on.
Wow. Well, thank you for that, because I do think it's really important. And for example, the letter from the FDA, what's called the complete response letter, rejecting the approval of MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, Lykos has kept it private.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't even seen it yet. They're like, so this idea of when it's not transparent, people can assume the worst, and they will assume the worst. Why didn't they make it public?
Yeah.
So with the new change in what's going on with Lykos, I'm going to get to see this letter, and I'm going to get to see why the Lykos management decided that it was better to keep it quiet than not. And they had a couple of reasons that I think were not the case, or not good reasons.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was, if we publish the letter, then and we want FDA to backtrack on some of these things, we'll solidify their position by making it public, and it'll be harder for them to make a different position.
Right.
I don't think that's true, because as I said, MAPS won 2 formal disputes with FDA, and we made everything public. So the other was, if we make all this public, it'll just give ammunition to the critics. And again, it's just like, it's okay for there to be critics. You need to respond and address it. Maybe you did make a mistake, and you can learn from that, the critics, or maybe that they have a wrong information. But I think that, too many people have this idea that FDA decided MDMA will never be made a medicine, just no. And it's really more not yet. And we need more information. And so, that's the sad part. So I just think the whole traditional pharmaceutical approach is not to share these things. They're always worried about competitors.
Right.
and that's the other thing I should say, is that like Rielle, when you talk about this group therapy project with psilocybin, I don't think, oh damn, that's competing against MDMA group therapy. What I think is, that's terrific that you're doing that. What we're trying to do is build a whole psychedelic ecosystem, and we want therapists to be able to choose ketamine, MDMA, psilocybin, ibogaine, whatever, and then customize treatments for each individual patient. So what is the mission? The mission has just been to bring psychedelic medicine and eventually legalization, psychedelic personal growth, psychedelic spirituality, and to bring it all together, to build the ecosystem. And there's more than enough suffering in the world that we need every tool possible. But I think that's why MAPS shared all the information. We want to help all the different people, and that they're not competitors. They're collaborators in building this psychedelic ecosystem and the psychedelic renaissance. So, but I think traditional pharma people say, don't let anybody know what we're doing. It'll help them understand how to work with FDA, and we don't want that. So that's
backwards.
But thank you, Gina, for that.
Yeah, well, no, thank you. It's really helpful to hear the truth of it. Also, to know that the Dutch did approve it, because that's not on the table, and we don't hear about that either. So everyone goes FDA, and so it's the FDA hasn't approved it, so everything was bad. But if an entire board has reviewed the exact same data and they're in consensus that it works, there's room for re-looking at it, or at least suggesting that maybe there was some misgivings at the FDA. So even that is helpful, because I just found that out. I only heard about the FDA not approving it,
Yeah,
and did not hear about the Dutch at all.
the Dutch State Committee report, there's an English version of it. It's really, really good. And it's, yeah, and it came out 2 days after. If only it had come out 2 days before. That could have changed everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's something that it's just this level of when you're doing something innovative, do you feel comfortable and can you stand behind it? And if you're not that comfortable, then you don't want criticism.
Yeah.
And that's what happened at Lykos. Not Sam to try to throw them under the bus, but I would just say that they weren't the right people for the job.
Right.
Well, thanks, Rick. I'm just looking at our time, and we have another question. I think it's the last hand that's raised this evening, and that's Harrison.
Hi, Rick. I am wondering if you have any thoughts about the fact that in Canada, Health Canada is proposing to create a consolidated regulations for controlled substances. And as part of that, they are essentially proposing to open up the SAP program from MDMA and psilocybin to any other drug that's considered a restricted drug, which really covers all the psychedelics, LSD, DMT, and pretty much all the other psychedelics that are controlled. I'm wondering what you think are the most promising substances that you think may have a shot at getting approval when a doctor writes into the SAP beyond MDMA and psilocybin.
Well, what a fun question. What are the most promising other psychedelics? Well, ibogaine is really important. There were ibogaine clinics in Canada. They've been shut down. They should be restarted. There's one of the main reasons that we have bipartisan support is because of ibogaine. It's because at this point, about 1,000 Navy SEALs and others have gone down to Mexico for ibogaine, for traumatic brain injury, PTSD, depression, substance abuse. Ibogaine is the drug that does have more health risks in terms of heart function. So it's better to be administered under medical supervision. When I took it, I did not do it that way. It was the iboga route, and I didn't do it that way. But I do think that I think that 5-MeO DMT is really, really interesting in that when I did it not too long ago, I was there's now 5-MeO DMT vape pens with different doses of 5-MeO DMT. When you take when I did 5-MeO DMT a long time ago, you smoke it, it's overwhelming. Your sense of self completely disintegrated. You're part of this, vast spiritual thing. And it's just immediate transformation. However, when you do these vape pens, you can start with lower doses. You can sort of dissolve your sense of self in increments. And what Stan Grof has said recently, not too long ago, is that the future of psychiatry is MDMA, and then an hour later, 5-MeO vape pens. But the thing about 5-MeO, so when I did it, I thought, okay, I'm going to have this beautiful spiritual experience, all this. I did a low dose, a couple puffs, or not puffs, but inhalations from the vape pens. Of the lower dose, my ego is still intact and stuff. And then I said, okay, I'll do a medium dose. And then in the medium dose, out came this trauma from 40 years ago that I hadn't fully processed. And I was with therapists to do it. And I felt like this term spiritual bypassing, that if I would have been ready to go to the highest dose, I would have not dealt with the trauma. So I spent the next couple hours dealing with the trauma. So in a very short amount of time, 5-MeO can really trigger and bring to the surface deep-seated traumas or deep-seated memories that are difficult from the past that still need to be integrated. And then you can do an hour or two therapy. It's not like a day-long thing. So I think that 5-MeO has got incredible promise. There's a bunch of stuff that have come from Canada, 3-MMC, 4-MMC, a whole other of these MDMA-like drugs that have different characteristics. You don't have as much exhaustion the next day. I don't feel that they go quite as deep as MDMA, but there may be therapeutic uses for those. But I guess what I'd like to say here is that there is such a rich cornucopia of different psychedelics that are in nature that we already know about. And then there's some new ones that have been developed synthetically, like 3-MMC, 4-MMC, things like that, that there's, if it can be done where the special access program is opened up to all these different drugs, there will be an enormous amount learned in Canada. And that, again, would be this plea that if that does happen, that the more information that can be gathered, the better. That would be fantastic.
Great.
Yeah,
Well, thank you very
some
much.
of our conversations with Health Canada have been around that sharing of information. And Harrison actually is on our board, and he did access to information, got a little bit, but we really want, they do collect those follow-ups. We really want to get them to share that data because it's there, it's being collected, let's use it. So I'm inspired after this conversation, re-inspired to get back on that.
Oh, good. Oh,
Yeah.
good.
I agree. Well, I think actually, Rielle, I think our time is drawn to a close. I want to just say thank you so much, Rick. Here at MAPS Canada, it means the world to us that you could find some time to not only share kind of your perspective, and the timing was perfect, a little bit about some of the latest and greatest, as well as your support for, you know, what we do in MAPS Canada here. I want to just point everyone to the chat that there's lots of resources that people have been sharing. Please feel free to join our mailing list. This has been really helpful in the ongoing support that we look for to continue to move our mission and vision forward here in Canada. And as Rielle said, really inspiring about what we can do here to be able to have the data, push the innovation, and really do its best for patients. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I don't know if there's any last words, Rick or Rielle, before we before we close our webinar.
Well, I guess I'll just, again, say that some of the most important LSD research began in Canada. Canada is really a source of the word psychedelic, you know, comes from Canada, from Humphrey Osmond when he was in Canada. So I think that what you're doing with Health Canada is just tremendous. I mean, MAPS Canada and all the work. And yeah, I think, you know, for the 51st state of America, you're doing pretty great.
That's a great way. That's a great way to end it.
Just lob that in and then leave us.
That's good, Joe.
Thanks everyone for attending. And I mean, this was a really great conversation. This was really fun. I could keep doing it forever, but thank you everybody for attending and supporting us at MAPS Canada, and really looking forward to all of this, what's coming down in 2025.
Wow.
Yeah, I agree. And we have the recording, so there will be an opportunity. We'll send that out to all of you that have joined us here this evening. So we'll be able to send that out for you so you can review all of Rick's wise words. Thank you so much. Take care.
Pleasure.
Good night.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.